Hello, and welcome to Boring Science to Sleep, a quiet place where science becomes slow, soft, and easy to drift through. Tonight, we're going to gently explore the rise and fall of the dinosaurs, not to learn every detail or memorize every name, but simply to wander through one of Earth's longest and quietest stories. Together, we'll travel across ancient landscapes, watch continents slowly reshape themselves, and quietly witness how life found new beginnings after unimaginable endings. Before you settle in, if you truly enjoy these calm journeys through the hidden stories of science, you're always welcome to like this video and subscribe, only if it feels right for you. And when you're ready, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's always a quiet joy to imagine people from so many different places drifting through these stories together beneath the same night sky. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps let a fan hum softly somewhere in the room. Settle into a comfortable position and allow the outside world to become just a little quieter. There is nowhere you need to go, nothing you need to solve, and nothing you need to remember. You are safe. There is nothing to do except listen, breathe gently, and slowly drift through time together. Long before the first dinosaur ever placed a footprint upon the earth, before forests filled with towering giants, before birds sang above green valleys, and before even the shapes of today's continents could be recognized, our planet entered one of the quietest chapters in its unimaginably long history. If you could somehow stand there, not as a visitor who wished to change anything, but simply as a calm observer, you might first notice the silence. Not the peaceful silence of a quiet evening, but the immense stillness of a world recovering from exhaustion. Only a short while earlier, in the language of the planet, Earth had experienced the greatest extinction it has ever known. Countless forms of life that had filled ancient oceans and wandered across dry land simply disappeared. The reasons were many, unfolding slowly over an enormous stretch of time. Great volcanic eruptions poured molten rock across the landscape again and again. The air changed, the climate shifted, oceans struggled. Food became scarce. One quiet change followed another until much of life could no longer continue. Today, scientists sometimes call this event the Great Dying. It sounds dramatic, but tonight, there is no need to imagine disaster. Instead, imagine what came afterward. Imagine the silence that follows a great storm. The clouds have already passed. The rain has stopped. Only stillness remains. The earth, too, seemed to pause. Across vast landscapes, the wind continued its patient journey, carrying grains of dust across empty plains. Rivers still flowed toward distant seas. Gentle waves still reached lonely shorelines before quietly slipping back into the water once more. The sun continued to rise, and each evening darkness returned with perfect reliability, just as it always had. The planet itself had not stopped living. It was simply waiting. Time, after all, moves differently for the Earth than it does for us. A single year feels long to people. A human lifetime feels longer still. But for mountains, oceans, and continents, millions of years can pass almost like slow, steady breaths. As you listen tonight, you may find it comforting to let your own sense of time soften as well. There is no rush here. Nothing happens quickly. Even change prefers to arrive one quiet moment at a time. If you looked across this ancient world, you would not yet find familiar forests filled with colorful flowers. Those flowers had not appeared. The grass beneath your feet, so common today, had not yet spread across the land. Instead, much of the landscape was open, dry, and simple. Hardy plants slowly returned wherever conditions allowed, patiently covering bare ground little by little. Life was beginning again. Not all at once, not dramatically, just quietly. Perhaps that is one of nature's gentlest lessons. After even the greatest endings, small beginnings often arrive so softly that they are almost impossible to notice. Tiny plants took root, small creatures searched for food, insects continued their quiet work beneath stones and fallen branches. The oceans, though changed forever, slowly welcomed new generations of life. Every living thing carried with it a possibility that the future could become different from the past. The remarkable story of the dinosaurs would eventually grow from these tiny possibilities. But for now, that story still rested beneath the horizon of time, waiting with extraordinary patience. If you listened carefully, you might hear only the wind moving across ancient rocks warmed by the day's sunlight. You might notice distant volcanoes resting after long periods of activity, their dark slopes blending into hazy skies. Layers of cooled lava stretched across parts of the landscape like enormous blankets of stone, silent reminders that the Earth itself is never entirely still beneath its surface. Yet even these powerful forces moved with astonishing slowness. Nothing hurried, nothing demanded attention. Everything unfolded according to rhythms far older than memory. Perhaps that is why ancient history can feel strangely calming. It reminds us that life has always been changing, always adapting, always beginning again in ways too gradual to witness all at once. The planet has never expected perfection. It has only continued, one quiet season after another, one generation after another, one small step after another. As your breathing becomes slower, you may begin to imagine those endless stretches of time as gentle waves rolling toward a distant shore. Each wave arrives softly, leaves almost no sound behind, and makes room for the next. Millions of years pass in much the same way, not with sudden leaps, but with countless quiet moments flowing together until entirely new worlds emerge. Far beyond the empty plains, beneath skies untouched by cities or human voices, another chapter was already preparing itself, in complete silence. Not through great battles, not through sudden miracles, but through countless small changes, patiently gathering across generations, too many to count. The Earth was healing, and somewhere within that long, peaceful recovery, the first quiet footsteps toward the age of dinosaurs had already begun, almost too softly for the world itself to notice. The Earth continued its quiet healing, not quickly, and not in ways that any single living creature could have noticed, but through countless gentle changes that accumulated one upon another, like tiny grains of sand, slowly building an endless shoreline. If you could continue your peaceful walk across this ancient world, you might begin to notice something remarkable about the land beneath your feet. There were no familiar continents separated by wide oceans, no Atlantic Ocean, no Pacific coastline stretching between distant countries, no Europe, Africa, Asia, or the Americas as we know them today. Instead, nearly all of Earth's land rested together as one enormous continent. Scientists call this ancient land Pangaea, a name that simply means all lands together. It is a beautiful description because, from high above, the planet would have looked almost as though someone had carefully gathered every piece of land into one giant puzzle, fitting nearly every edge together. Around this immense continent stretched an equally immense ocean. Rather than many separate seas, there was one vast body of water surrounding almost everything. Scientists call this ancient ocean Panthalassa, meaning all sea. You don't need to remember the name. It is enough to imagine an ocean so wide that no human eye could ever hope to see the opposite shore. Land and water existed in an entirely different balance than they do today. It made the world feel both strangely simple and wonderfully unfamiliar. As you quietly wander across this enormous continent, you may notice that much of the landscape feels surprisingly open. Dense forests are still rare. Rolling grasslands do not yet exist. Instead, broad plains stretch toward distant horizons beneath pale skies. Rocky hills rise slowly from the land, their surfaces shaped by wind more often than by flowing rivers. In many places, the ground is dry, and each gentle breeze lifts tiny clouds of dust before letting them settle again. It is not a lifeless world. Far from it. Life is returning, but it is returning with extraordinary patience. The air itself is a little different from the air you breathe today. Modern scientists believe there may have been less oxygen than there is now. You don't need to imagine struggling to breathe. Instead, simply picture an atmosphere that feels just a little thinner, encouraging every living creature to make the most of each calm breath. Perhaps that is one reason nature began quietly experimenting with more efficient ways of moving air through the bodies of animals. No one planned it. No one designed it. Over countless generations, tiny differences slowly accumulated. And some creatures found themselves just a little better suited to this changing world than others. Far away, the Earth continued another slow conversation beneath its surface. Deep underground, immense rivers of molten rock moved almost lazily through the planet's interior. Every so often, they reached the surface through volcanoes, adding fresh layers of dark stone across parts of the landscape. These eruptions were powerful, but between them stretched long periods of quiet, allowing life to gradually reclaim the land once again. The world was never perfectly still, yet neither was it ever truly chaotic for very long. Everything moved according to rhythms measured not in days or seasons, but in millions of years. As the climate slowly shifted, hardy plants continued their patient work. Great forests of flowering trees had not yet arrived, but ancient relatives of modern ferns spread across damp places where water lingered. Tall relatives of horsetails grew beside slow-moving rivers, while sturdy conifers, distant ancestors of today's pine trees, gradually claimed higher ground. The landscape remained simple: gentle greens, earthy browns, soft gray stone. Nothing seemed hurried. Nothing competed for attention. It was a world that almost invited silence. Among these quiet landscapes wandered many different kinds of reptiles. Most would never become dinosaurs. Some would disappear entirely. Others would leave descendants that are still alive today. One particular group, however, carried within them a collection of quiet advantages that would eventually reshape life on Earth. Scientists call these animals archosaurs. The name may sound unfamiliar, but the idea is surprisingly simple. Imagine a great family tree. One branch would slowly become the crocodiles resting beside rivers today. Another would eventually lead to graceful flying reptiles that ruled ancient skies. A different branch would one day give rise to birds, whose songs still greet each morning. And another branch, still small and unremarkable for now, would slowly become the dinosaurs. At this point in Earth's story, none of those futures could be seen. The animals themselves were neither enormous nor especially impressive. Many were no larger than dogs. Some walked on 4 legs. Others spent more time standing upright, their bodies balancing a little differently from the reptiles that had come before them. Without realizing it, they were quietly experimenting with new ways of moving through the world. Their legs rested beneath their bodies instead of stretching outward to the sides. That simple difference allowed them to walk with a little more balance and a little less wasted effort. It was not a dramatic invention. It was simply one small improvement among countless others, and over immense stretches of time, those tiny improvements began adding together. Nature often works this way. It rarely changes everything overnight. Instead, it gently adjusts one detail, then another, and then another still, until a creature that once seemed ordinary slowly becomes something entirely new. If you watched this ancient world for only a single afternoon, you might believe nothing was changing at all. If you watched for 1,000 years, the landscape would still appear almost the same. Even after many thousands of generations, change would remain difficult to notice. Yet beneath that appearance of stillness, evolution continued its quiet work. Like water slowly polishing a stone. Like roots patiently finding tiny spaces within solid rock. Like the steady rhythm of your own breathing, calm enough that you hardly notice it until you choose to listen. Perhaps that is why the history of life feels so peaceful. Its greatest transformations almost never happen with sudden noise. They unfold through countless gentle moments, each one too small to see on its own, yet together capable of changing an entire world. Across the endless plains of Pangaea, beneath warm sunlight and vast open skies, those quiet changes continued day after day, season after season, century after century. The animals themselves had no idea they were standing at the edge of one of Earth's greatest stories. They simply searched for food. They rested when darkness came. They greeted another sunrise. And somewhere among these small, ordinary lives, a few humble creatures were slowly becoming the ancestors of every dinosaur that would one day walk beneath the ancient sun. Across the endless landscapes of Pangaea, the quiet rhythm of life continued almost unchanged. The wind still wandered across wide plains. Rivers still traced gentle paths toward distant seas. Ancient conifer forests slowly stretched a little farther each generation, while hardy ferns covered patches of damp ground wherever they could find enough water. If you had returned to this world after only a few seasons, you might have believed that nothing had changed at all. Even after hundreds of years, the differences would have been difficult to notice. That is one of the comforting truths about evolution. It rarely announces itself. It prefers whispers over celebrations, patience over speed, and tiny improvements over dramatic transformations. Somewhere among the many reptiles already living on this ancient Earth, a few small animals had begun following a slightly different path. They were not giants. They were not kings of the landscape. In fact, if you happened to see one crossing a sunlit riverbank, you might not even stop to watch. Most of the earliest dinosaurs were surprisingly small. Many stood no taller than a large dog. Some weighed little more than a modern person. They moved lightly across the ground, weaving between larger animals that had ruled the world long before they arrived. Today, scientists have given names to some of these early pioneers. You may hear names like Eoraptor or Herrerasaurus. There is no need to remember them. Think of them simply as some of the earliest members of a family, whose descendants would one day include creatures as large as buildings and as graceful as the birds outside your window. At the time, however, they were simply small animals trying to survive. That was enough. Their world demanded no greatness. Only another sunrise, only another meal, only another safe place to rest before night returned. As you quietly observe them, one gentle difference begins to stand out. Their legs rest directly beneath their bodies instead of stretching outward to the sides. It may sound like a small detail, and in many ways it is. Yet sometimes the smallest changes quietly shape the biggest stories. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack. If the weight hangs awkwardly to one side, every step requires a little extra effort. But when the weight rests comfortably over your shoulders, walking becomes easier, smoother, and less tiring. The earliest dinosaurs carried their bodies in much the same balanced way. They wasted less energy with each step. They could travel a little farther. They could keep moving a little longer. Nature did not reward them overnight. It simply offered tiny advantages, repeated millions upon millions of times. Inside their bodies, another quiet improvement may also have been taking shape. Many scientists believe these early dinosaurs possessed a breathing system that gradually became more efficient than that of many neighboring reptiles. Rather than imagining complicated anatomy, picture a gentle stream flowing through a peaceful valley. The water never stops moving. Fresh water quietly replaces older water, allowing the stream to remain clear and full of life. Their breathing may have worked in a similarly graceful way, allowing fresh air to continue moving through the lungs instead of simply flowing in and out. That steady movement helped deliver oxygen more effectively, especially in a world where the atmosphere may have carried a little less of it than we breathe today. It was not a dramatic superpower. It was simply another small advantage, one more quiet improvement among many. Some of these little dinosaurs may even have carried simple feather-like coverings across parts of their bodies. Not the broad wings of modern birds. Not yet. Instead, imagine soft strands that helped keep warmth close during cooler nights, or perhaps made individuals easier to recognize within their own kind. Nature often invents something for one purpose before discovering an entirely different use much later. A feather does not begin its story by carrying an animal into the sky. Sometimes it begins simply by keeping a small creature warm beneath the stars. As millions of years drifted by, these early dinosaurs remained only one group among many. They did not immediately become the rulers of Earth. Around them lived countless other reptiles, each well adapted to its own corner of the ancient world. Some were larger, some stronger. Some had already enjoyed millions of years of success. If someone had looked across the landscape then and tried to predict the future, they might easily have chosen another group to inherit the planet. History often feels obvious, only after it has already happened. Nature rarely follows the path we expect. And sometimes, survival depends not only upon adaptation, but also upon timing. Gradually, the Earth itself began changing once again. Volcanic activity increased across parts of the planet. The climate shifted. Ecosystems that had remained stable for countless generations slowly became less predictable. Many ancient species struggled to adapt to these changing conditions. Over a long span of time, another great extinction unfolded. It was not as enormous as the Great Dying that had come before, but it was still powerful enough to reshape life across much of the world. Many of the larger reptiles that had once competed with the young dinosaurs disappeared. Their familiar footprints slowly vanished from riverbanks and forests. Their voices, whatever they may have sounded like, faded into silence. The landscapes became quieter once again, not empty. Simply quieter. And in that quiet, opportunities appeared. No creature celebrated. No animal understood what had happened. The little dinosaurs simply continued doing what they had always done. They searched for food. They raised their young. They crossed rivers. They rested beneath ancient trees. Generation after generation, their numbers slowly grew. Sometimes success in nature is not about defeating a rival. Sometimes it is simply about remaining when others can no longer continue. It is a gentle thought, perhaps even a comforting one. Life does not always move forward through sudden victories. More often, it continues through quiet persistence. through ordinary mornings repeated again and again, through patient adaptation, through countless small decisions made by creatures that never knew they were changing the future. The world around them gradually opened. Forests stretched farther across the land. New habitats appeared. Fresh opportunities waited beyond distant hills and winding rivers. Without hurry, without ambition, and without any awareness of what lay ahead, the descendants of those small pioneers began spreading across the recovering Earth. The age of giant dinosaurs was still far away. Towering necks had not yet reached into ancient forests. Thunderous footsteps had not yet echoed across broad floodplains. The skies had not yet welcomed feathered descendants into graceful flight. All of that still belonged to the distant future. For now, there were only a handful of small animals walking quietly beneath a warm Triassic sun, carrying within their balanced bodies and gentle breathing the tiny beginnings of one of the longest and most extraordinary chapters in the history of life. And as the seasons continued their slow, unbroken rhythm, the Earth itself seemed almost ready to welcome the giants that had not yet learned they were coming. The small dinosaurs continued their quiet journey across the ancient world. They did not suddenly become giants. They did not wake one morning to discover that the Earth belonged to them. Instead, they lived one ordinary day after another, following rivers that changed course with the seasons, resting beneath forests that slowly grew thicker, and raising new generations beneath skies that had watched countless lives come and go before them. If you could quietly follow one of these animals for an entire day, you might be surprised by how peaceful its life often seemed. It walked, it searched, it paused, it listened, it breathed, and then it walked again. Nothing about its routine suggested that its descendants would one day dominate the planet for more than 160 million years. Nature rarely announces its greatest successes while they are still unfolding. Perhaps that is because success, in the natural world, is almost never built from a single remarkable ability. Instead, it grows from many small advantages, each one almost too ordinary to notice on its own. Imagine weaving a blanket. One thread seems unimportant. Then another is added, and another. No single thread creates warmth, yet together they become something strong enough to shelter an entire family. The story of the dinosaurs unfolded much the same way. One quiet advantage joined another, until together they formed a way of life that fit remarkably well within the changing world around them. One of those advantages was the way they carried themselves. Earlier reptiles often held their legs stretched outward, leaving much of their energy devoted simply to supporting their own weight. The dinosaurs, by contrast, balanced themselves more directly above their legs. If you have ever pushed a shopping cart with one loose wheel, you know how much effort it takes to keep moving in a straight line. Now imagine replacing that difficult wheel with one that turns smoothly. The journey itself does not become shorter. It simply becomes easier. Each step requires a little less effort. Each movement wastes a little less energy. Over a single afternoon, the difference might seem insignificant. Across millions of years, it became one quiet piece of a much larger story. Inside their bodies, another gentle improvement continued working, without drawing attention to itself. Many scientists believe dinosaurs inherited a breathing system that allowed fresh air to move through their lungs in an unusually efficient way, much like the breathing system found in birds today. Rather than imagining complicated organs hidden beneath skin and bone, picture a cool breeze flowing continuously through the open windows of a peaceful house. Fresh air enters. Older air quietly moves onward. Nothing becomes crowded or stale. The movement is smooth, gentle, and constant. A breathing system like that helped these animals remain active for longer periods without exhausting themselves. It was not about running endlessly. It was about using energy wisely. Nature often favors quiet efficiency over dramatic strength. There is another question that scientists still explore today. How warm were dinosaur bodies? The answer is more mysterious than it might first appear. Some animals living today depend almost entirely upon the warmth of the sun. Others create much of their own warmth from within. Dinosaurs may have occupied a comfortable middle ground, with many species remaining active even when temperatures changed. Rather than imagining them as either cold machines or overheated engines, perhaps it is gentler to picture them as animals whose bodies quietly adapted to the needs of their own environments. Different dinosaurs may have solved the same problem in different ways. Nature is wonderfully flexible like that. It rarely insists upon a single perfect answer. As the years quietly unfolded into millions of years, dinosaurs also became remarkably adaptable. Some remained small enough to slip between dense vegetation. Others gradually grew larger. Some preferred forests. Others wandered broad floodplains. Some searched for leaves high above the ground. Others hunted smaller animals moving through the undergrowth. The earth offered many different homes, and little by little, dinosaurs learned how to live within nearly all of them. Their success came not because every dinosaur was the same, but because they slowly became wonderfully different from one another. Variation itself became one of their greatest strengths. Perhaps one of the gentlest discoveries modern science has made concerns the way many dinosaurs cared for their young. For a long time, people imagined dinosaurs as solitary creatures that laid eggs and simply walked away. The fossil record has slowly painted a softer picture. In several places around the world, scientists have uncovered ancient nesting grounds where adults returned again and again, season after season. Some fossils even preserve adults resting directly above their nests, almost as though they were quietly protecting the eggs beneath them. Imagine an early morning wrapped in soft mist. A parent remains completely still, while tiny lives continue developing beneath a circle of carefully arranged eggs. The forest around them slowly awakens. Leaves move gently in the breeze. Small insects begin another ordinary day. Nothing dramatic happens. Yet in that quiet moment, a familiar feeling appears: care. Across millions of years, the simple act of protecting the next generation remained one of life's most enduring traditions. Some dinosaurs almost certainly traveled together. We know this not because anyone watched them, but because the earth remembered. Ancient footprints, preserved in stone, reveal groups of animals walking side by side across soft ground long ago. Some footprints belong to enormous adults. Beside them are much smaller prints, likely made by younger animals. It is difficult not to imagine families moving together beneath ancient skies. No fossil can tell us every detail. It cannot preserve every sound or every glance. Yet even silent footprints whisper small stories to those willing to listen patiently. By now, the Earth itself was changing once again. The single giant continent that had once seemed almost endless began an extraordinarily slow separation. Great cracks formed deep within the crust. Land that had rested together for ages started drifting apart so gradually that no living creature could ever notice the movement during its own lifetime. Imagine watching a flower bloom so slowly that each passing hour appears identical to the last. Only after many days do you suddenly realize it has completely opened. The continents moved with that same quiet patience. As new coastlines formed and fresh landscapes appeared, dinosaurs encountered new environments filled with different challenges. Some populations became separated by expanding seas and distant mountain ranges. Over countless generations, they slowly changed in their own unique directions. One group became many, many became hundreds, and eventually, hundreds became an astonishing variety of forms, each carrying its own quiet solution to the challenges of survival. Without planning it, without understanding it, and without ever realizing the scale of their own success, dinosaurs had become the dominant animals across much of the land. Not because they were invincible, not because they were perfect, but because, over unimaginable stretches of time, they had patiently collected one small advantage after another, weaving them together like countless threads into one of the most enduring stories life has ever written upon the earth. And beneath forests that continued growing taller with every passing age, some of those quiet descendants were beginning to reach sizes that the world had never seen before. As the ages continued to unfold, the earth became softer in many ways. The dry landscapes that had once stretched across much of the great supercontinent slowly gave way to greener worlds. Rain fell a little more often in many regions. Rivers wandered across broad valleys. Lakes reflected enormous skies, while forests spread farther than they had for millions of years. Nothing changed overnight. The forests did not suddenly appear. They arrived one quiet season at a time. A young tree grew where sunlight reached the ground. Another followed, then another. Century after century, generation after generation, green slowly reclaimed the land until vast forests covered enormous parts of the earth. If you could quietly step into one of those Jurassic forests, the first thing you might notice would not be the animals. It would be the feeling. The air would seem warm and comfortably heavy with moisture. Soft mist might drift between towering trees during the early morning, while gentle rays of sunlight filtered through layers of fern leaves above your head. There would be no flowering plants yet, no colorful meadows, no fields of wildflowers dancing in the breeze. Instead, the forests would be filled with ancient conifers, giant tree ferns, cycads with broad crowns of stiff leaves, and tall horsetails growing beside slow-moving streams. The world felt green in a quieter way, older, calmer, almost timeless. If you stood completely still, you might begin hearing distant sounds carried through the forest. A branch bending, leaves brushing together, the slow splash of water, and somewhere beyond the trees, a deep, rhythmic vibration. Not frightening, simply enormous. At first, you might mistake it for distant thunder. But the sky remains perfectly clear. The sound comes again, slow, patient, steady. A few moments later, the source finally appears, not suddenly, almost gradually. A neck rises above the treetops, then another, and another still. One by one, enormous animals emerge from the forest, like moving hills. These are the great long-necked dinosaurs that scientists call sauropods. You do not need to remember the name. It is enough to picture peaceful giants whose lives revolved around little more than walking, eating, resting, and quietly continuing another ordinary day beneath the ancient sun. Some would eventually become among the largest animals ever to walk upon land. Their bodies stretched farther than many modern houses. Their heads reached heights that today would overlook several stories of a building. Yet despite their astonishing size, much of their day remained surprisingly gentle. They simply searched for leaves. A slow step, a quiet breath, another mouthful of greenery, then another. Nature often reminds us that greatness does not always arrive with speed. Sometimes greatness moves almost silently. It may seem impossible that animals of such extraordinary size could support themselves at all. Yet once again, nature solved a seemingly impossible problem through many small ideas working together. Imagine holding a sturdy wooden ladder. It feels solid, but much of its strength comes from the empty spaces between the rails, rather than from solid wood filling every corner. Many of these giant dinosaurs carried bones that were remarkably light for their size, strengthened from within while avoiding unnecessary weight. Their skeletons were not fragile. They were beautifully efficient. Inside their bodies, the same gentle breathing system that had helped their smaller ancestors continued serving them well. Fresh air flowed steadily through networks of tiny air-filled spaces, helping these giants remain active despite the enormous size of their bodies. You never need to picture complicated anatomy. Simply imagine a cool breeze moving slowly through the open rooms of a quiet house, always fresh, always flowing, never becoming trapped. Nature rarely wastes energy. It simply keeps improving what already works. The long necks of these peaceful giants offered another quiet advantage. Rather than walking constantly from one tree to another, they could remain almost perfectly still while reaching leaves growing in many different directions. Imagine sitting comfortably beneath the branches of a fruit tree, able to gather fruit from one branch after another without needing to stand each time. Sometimes the easiest movement is the one you never have to make. Over millions of years, even tiny savings of energy become valuable companions. Scientists believe many of these giants likely traveled together. The Earth has preserved long lines of ancient footprints crossing muddy ground that later hardened into stone. Some prints belong to immense adults. Others are much smaller, walking close beside them. Although no fossil can capture every moment of ancient life, these quiet pathways suggest something comforting. Perhaps families moved together. Perhaps younger animals found safety by remaining near older ones. Perhaps the forest echoed not only with enormous footsteps, but with the gentle rhythm of life shared between generations. Imagine watching such a herd from a distant hillside. No rushing, no panic. Just dozens of enormous animals moving with remarkable patience through forests that seemed almost endless. Each step arrives softly despite its weight. Each breath disappears into the warm morning air. Even the smallest members of the group appear unhurried, trusting the quiet rhythm established by those walking before them. While these giants wandered ancient forests, the Earth itself continued another journey that almost no creature could perceive. The great continent of Pangaea had already begun separating, but the movement remained unimaginably slow. Each year, the land shifted by only a tiny amount, far less than the length of your hand. No dinosaur ever woke one morning to discover a new ocean. Instead, countless generations lived and disappeared, while the continents quietly drifted apart beneath them. Imagine placing two leaves upon the surface of a perfectly calm pond. At first, they seem almost motionless. Only after watching patiently for a very long time do you notice that they have slowly drifted away from one another. The continents moved with that same gentle patience. As oceans gradually widened and mountains slowly rose, groups of dinosaurs became separated from one another. Animals that once shared the same forests now lived in different lands, surrounded by different climates, different plants, and different challenges. Generation after generation, they slowly changed. Not because they wished to, simply because life always responds to the world around it. Some developed longer necks, others stronger limbs. Some remained relatively small. Others grew larger than anyone might have imagined possible. The forests themselves quietly shaped those choices. The climate shaped them, the rivers shaped them. Even the distance between one continent and another became part of the story. Everything was connected. The drifting land, the growing forests, the changing skies, the breathing animals, the passing millions of years. Together they formed one vast conversation between the earth and every living creature upon it. And as these peaceful giants continued their endless search for leaves beneath warm Jurassic skies, another family of dinosaurs was quietly following a very different path, one that would eventually lead not upward into the treetops, but toward speed, sharp senses, and the first delicate feathers that hinted at an entirely new future. The forests continued their quiet conversation with the passing ages. Towering conifers reached toward warm skies, while giant ferns spread across the forest floor in countless shades of green. The great herds of long-necked dinosaurs wandered peacefully from one valley to another, leaving gentle trails of enormous footprints that the soft earth patiently remembered. Life seemed wonderfully balanced. Where there were forests, there were leaves. Where there were leaves, there were gentle giants. And wherever gentle giants lived, other animals quietly followed. If you listened carefully beneath the steady chorus of insects and the rustling of ancient leaves, you might notice another rhythm hidden within the forest. Lighter footsteps, quicker footsteps, not loud enough to disturb the peaceful morning, only quiet enough to remind the forest that many different lives shared the same world. Among those lives were a family of dinosaurs that followed a very different path from the peaceful giants. Their bodies remained much smaller, their movements became lighter, their senses grew sharper. Instead of spending most of the day reaching for leaves high above the ground, they watched carefully, listening to every sound carried through the trees. Today, scientists call this group theropods. The name may sound unfamiliar, but many of the most famous dinosaurs belong to this remarkable family. Long before Tyrannosaurus rex would appear millions of years later, the Jurassic forests were already home to graceful hunters such as Allosaurus. There is no need to picture a terrifying monster. Instead, imagine a wild wolf moving quietly through a modern forest. It is not angry. It is not cruel. It is simply living another ordinary day. Predators are often misunderstood. To us, they may seem frightening. To the forest itself, they are simply another part of life's gentle balance. A hunter keeps herds moving. Healthy animals survive. Weakness rarely spreads unchecked. Even fallen trees eventually nourish new forests. Nature has always preferred balance over perfection. An animal like Allosaurus likely spent far more time walking than chasing. Imagine it moving carefully between enormous tree trunks, placing one foot after another with remarkable patience. Its head remained level. Its eyes quietly observed every movement ahead. The forest offered many sounds. A distant splash, leaves stirred by a breeze, the soft cracking of branches beneath heavy feet. Most of those sounds meant nothing. Only occasionally did one become important. Like many animals today, hunting probably required far more patience than speed. Hours of quiet observation, a brief moment of action, then stillness returned once again. Modern discoveries have gradually changed the way scientists imagine these animals. For many years, dinosaurs were often pictured as enormous reptiles covered entirely in rough scales. The image felt complete, simple, easy to understand. Yet the Earth had quietly preserved another story beneath layers of stone. In several remarkable fossil discoveries, scientists found delicate impressions surrounding the bones of certain dinosaurs. Not leaves, not cracks in the rock, but tiny structures that looked surprisingly familiar. Feathers, not large flight feathers, not broad wings, simply soft coverings that once grew across parts of their bodies. At first, this discovery surprised many people. After all, Feathers seem to belong naturally to birds, but nature rarely places firm boundaries between one chapter and the next. Instead, it prefers gentle transitions. Imagine a painter slowly blending one color into another. There is no single brushstroke where blue suddenly becomes green, only countless tiny shades connecting both. Evolution often works in much the same way. Feathers almost certainly began their story without any connection to flight. A small covering could help keep warmth close during cool nights. It might make an animal appear larger when facing a rival. Perhaps bright patterns helped attract a mate during the breeding season. Something that begins with one purpose may quietly discover many others over millions of years. A feather first warmed, later it decorated. Much later still, it helped carry life into the air. Nature has extraordinary patience. One of the most beautiful examples of that patience appears in a fossil discovered in Germany during the 19th century. Scientists named it Archaeopteryx. You do not need to remember its name. Instead, imagine meeting a creature that cannot quite decide whether it belongs to yesterday or tomorrow. It carried feathers much like a bird, yet its mouth still held tiny teeth. Its long tail remained made of bone, rather than the short feathered tail we see in modern birds. Small claws rested upon its wings, allowing it to climb among branches with ease. It seemed almost like a quiet conversation between two different ages of life. Not entirely dinosaur, not entirely bird. A beautiful reminder that nature almost never leaps from one idea to another. It simply changes one gentle detail at a time. If you watched this remarkable little animal moving through the Jurassic forest, you might not even notice that history was unfolding before your eyes. Perhaps it climbed the rough bark of a tree. Perhaps it leaped from one branch toward another, spreading feathered arms that slowed its fall. Perhaps it glided gracefully through shafts of warm sunlight before landing upon another trunk. Its first journeys through the air were likely short, careful, uncertain. Every great adventure begins with small experiments. The sky itself was slowly becoming part of evolution's story. Scientists have also discovered feathered relatives that appeared long after Archaeopteryx, and some that lived before it. Each discovery adds another gentle brushstroke to a picture that is still being painted today. Some feathered dinosaurs remained firmly on the ground. Others climbed trees. A few may have glided between branches. Nature was exploring possibilities without any hurry. No creature knew where those experiments would eventually lead. Millions of years later, every sparrow, robin, eagle, owl, and hummingbird would quietly carry the results of those ancient experiments within their own feathers. The birds outside your window each morning are not simply distant relatives of dinosaurs, they are living dinosaurs themselves, the only branch of that great family that continues flying through today's skies. It is a thought that feels almost magical, though it rests firmly upon careful scientific evidence. The next time you hear birds singing at dawn, you might imagine those songs echoing across unimaginably deep time, connecting peaceful mornings today with warm Jurassic forests that vanished long before human beings ever appeared. As the forests gently swayed beneath another golden sunset, feathered shapes settled among ancient branches, while the great giants continued their endless search for leaves below. The Earth had not yet reached the height of the age of dinosaurs. Its richest chapter still waited beyond the horizon of time. Even greater diversity, even stranger forms, even more remarkable lives were quietly preparing to appear as the ancient world continued its slow and patient transformation. The world continued changing, just as it always had. Not with sudden surprises, but through countless gentle moments, so small that no single creature could ever witness the entire story. The forests that had sheltered the great Jurassic giants slowly evolved into something even richer. Rivers wandered across broader floodplains. New coastlines quietly appeared as the ancient continents continued their patient journey away from one another. Mountain ranges slowly lifted toward the sky, while shallow seas reached inland, creating warm shores where entirely new communities of life could flourish. If you could quietly rise above the earth and look down from far beyond the clouds, you might notice that the great supercontinent was no longer whole. The pieces had drifted apart ever so slowly, like leaves carried across the surface of an almost motionless lake. No dinosaur ever noticed this movement. Not because it was hidden, but because it was wonderfully slow. Generation after generation lived entire lives while the land beneath their feet moved only the smallest distance. For the Earth, patience had always been the language of change. As the continents slowly separated, they carried their forests, rivers, and animals with them. Groups that had once lived together found themselves separated by growing seas. Some wandered into cooler regions, others remained beneath warm tropical skies. Each landscape gently asked different questions of the animals that lived there. Can you find food here? Can you raise your young here? Can your body adapt to this place? Over millions upon millions of years, the answers slowly appeared. Some dinosaurs grew larger, others became smaller. Some developed remarkable armor, others carried horns. Some learned to browse among low shrubs, while others reached high into the trees. No single design became perfect. Instead, nature quietly explored hundreds of possibilities at once. Perhaps that is one of evolution's most comforting lessons. There is rarely only one way to succeed. The Earth has always welcomed many different answers to the same quiet question. As the landscapes became more varied, so too did the plants. For countless ages, ancient conifers, cycads, and giant ferns had shaped the appearance of the forests. Now another kind of plant began quietly spreading across the world. These were the first flowering plants. At first, they were modest. Small blossoms appeared among older vegetation, adding touches of color that the earth had rarely seen before. No vast fields of flowers covered the landscape overnight. Instead, each new bloom arrived almost unnoticed. One valley, one riverbank, one quiet forest clearing, then another, and another still. The world became just a little more colorful with each passing age. Those simple flowers quietly transformed almost everything around them. Their seeds traveled in new ways. Their leaves offered fresh sources of food. Their fruits provided nourishment that earlier forests had never known. Even the smallest changes rippled outward through the entire living world. Tiny insects were among the first to notice. Beetles wandered from flower to flower, carrying fine grains of golden pollen without understanding the important role they played. Soon, early bees joined this quiet partnership. No one instructed them. No one planned their work. The flowers simply offered nourishment. The insects simply searched for food. Together, they created one of nature's most enduring friendships. Imagine a quiet morning, warmed by gentle sunlight. A single flower opens beside a slow-moving stream. A tiny insect lands upon its center for only a few moments before drifting away toward another blossom. The exchange seems almost too small to matter. Yet millions of such tiny journeys quietly shaped forests across entire continents. Nature often changes the world through its smallest travelers. As plants became more diverse, the animals that depended upon them quietly followed. New kinds of herbivorous dinosaurs appeared across the changing landscapes. Smaller creatures found shelter beneath dense vegetation. Larger animals discovered fresh sources of food stretching across broad floodplains. Even the predators benefited, for wherever peaceful plant eaters gathered, hunters could also survive. Everything became connected. The flowers, the insects, the forests, the rivers, the dinosaurs, even the changing continents themselves. Each depended upon the others in ways that no single creature could ever fully understand. The earth had become wonderfully full, not crowded, balanced. Imagine looking across a wide valley during the warmth of late afternoon. A river curves gently through tall vegetation. Groups of plant-eating dinosaurs move slowly across open meadows. Small feathered animals disappear between patches of shade. Far above, graceful flying reptiles drift effortlessly upon warm currents of air. Insects hum quietly among flowering branches. Nothing feels hurried. No single creature dominates every corner of the landscape. Instead, every living thing quietly occupies its own place within an ancient rhythm that has been unfolding for millions of years. It is tempting to imagine this as the perfect age of dinosaurs. In many ways, it truly was their greatest moment. By now, they lived across nearly every environment on land. They ranged from tiny feathered hunters scarcely larger than today's birds to peaceful giants whose footsteps gently shook the ground beneath ancient forests. Some wore armor, like living castles. Others carried elegant horns. Some possessed duck-shaped mouths perfectly suited for gathering soft vegetation. Others relied upon powerful jaws to hunt. The remarkable variety of forms had not appeared because nature was searching for perfection. It had appeared because the earth itself offered countless different ways to live. Every valley told a slightly different story. Every forest asked a different question. Every coastline quietly encouraged another new experiment, and over immense stretches of time, life answered them all. If you listened carefully enough, perhaps the entire planet would seem less like a battlefield and more like a great orchestra. Every species contributed its own gentle note. The insects hummed softly beneath flowering branches. The rivers whispered toward distant seas. The forests breathed with the changing wind. The giant dinosaurs added slow, steady footsteps that echoed through the valleys. Even silence had its place. No single sound overwhelmed the others. Together, they formed a world that felt complete. Yet among all these countless forms of life, a few remarkable families of gentle giants were quietly becoming some of the most recognizable animals ever to walk upon the earth. Some carried magnificent horns, some wore suits of natural armor, others traveled in great peaceful herds, their unusual mouths perfectly designed for endless fields of ancient plants. Their story was only beginning to unfold beneath the warm Cretaceous sun. The ancient world had become wonderfully rich. Forests stretched across valleys where rivers wandered patiently toward distant seas. Flowering plants continued spreading across the landscape, adding gentle colors that earlier ages had never known. Insects drifted from blossom to blossom, while birds, still carrying the long legacy of their dinosaur ancestors, fluttered quietly between branches. And beneath those forests lived some of the most extraordinary plant eaters the earth has ever known. If you could stand upon a gentle hillside overlooking one of those broad Cretaceous plains, you might first notice movement rather than individual animals, a distant line slowly crossing the horizon, not rushing, not fleeing, simply traveling together. As the morning mist gradually lifted, the shapes became clearer. Some carried magnificent horns that caught the warm sunlight. Others appeared wrapped in natural armor, as though they had been carefully carved from stone. Still others moved with broad, rounded mouths held close to the ground, gathering endless mouthfuls of leaves as they wandered. Although they looked very different from one another, their lives shared a surprisingly peaceful rhythm. Most of every day was devoted to one simple task: finding enough plants to eat. To us, that may sound ordinary, but for animals weighing several tons, eating was not simply an activity. It was the gentle rhythm around which each day unfolded. Step, pause, gather another mouthful, chew slowly, then continue walking beneath the open sky. Perhaps that slow rhythm explains why these great herbivores feel strangely calming to imagine. They remind us that enormous strength can exist without hurry. Among the most recognizable of these peaceful giants were the horned dinosaurs. Today we know the most famous as Triceratops. Rather than seeing it as a warrior, imagine meeting an enormous grazing animal quietly standing beside a river as evening approaches. Its broad body remains perfectly still while it tears soft vegetation from the ground. Above its face rise three impressive horns, while a great shield of bone gently curves behind its head, like a wide natural collar. For many years, people imagined these horns existed only for battle. Modern science paints a quieter picture. Certainly, they could have helped protect the animal from danger when necessary, yet they may also have served gentler purposes. Much like the antlers of deer or the colorful feathers of birds today, these magnificent structures may have helped individuals recognize one another from a distance. They may have played a role in choosing mates. They may even have signaled maturity or health without a single confrontation ever taking place. Nature often creates beauty and usefulness together. Not every impressive structure is meant for fighting. Sometimes it simply tells a story about the animal carrying it. Nearby wandered another remarkable family, whose appearance seemed almost unbelievable. These were the armored dinosaurs. Imagine an animal whose back is covered with thousands of sturdy plates, woven together like a beautifully crafted mosaic. Its body seems less like soft skin, and more like a quiet landscape of rounded stone. Even its eyelids carried small protective scales. Its neck, shoulders, and sides formed a living shield that had taken millions of years to perfect. Scientists call these remarkable animals ankylosaurs, but you do not need to remember the name. Think instead of a peaceful traveler wearing its own little fortress wherever it went. Despite such extraordinary protection, there is little reason to imagine these animals constantly searching for conflict. Quite the opposite. Armor often allows its owner to remain calm. An animal that feels secure has little reason to become aggressive. Perhaps these quiet plant eaters simply continued browsing, while trusting the patient defenses nature had slowly built around them. At the end of their tails, some carried a rounded club made of solid bone. It certainly could have been used to defend against danger if absolutely necessary. Yet for most days, it likely swung gently from side to side with every slow step, doing nothing more dramatic than following the quiet rhythm of walking. Not every remarkable adaptation announces itself through action. Sometimes it simply waits. Another family of herbivores solved the challenge of eating in an entirely different way. Their mouths were broad and flattened, giving them an appearance that reminds many people of modern ducks. For this reason, they are often called duck-billed dinosaurs. Yet their most astonishing feature remained hidden inside their jaws. Imagine looking inside an old-fashioned windmill, where countless gears quietly turn together. Or picture a long conveyor, gently carrying one object after another, through a peaceful workshop. Inside the mouths of these animals rested hundreds of tiny teeth arranged in carefully organized rows. As older teeth gradually wore down from chewing tough plants, new ones slowly moved into place from below. There was never a sudden moment when the animal found itself unable to eat. Instead, The entire system renewed itself little by little throughout its life. Nature had quietly created something wonderfully reliable. A slow-moving conveyor of fresh teeth, always ready for another mouthful of leaves. These duck-billed dinosaurs spent countless peaceful hours gathering enormous amounts of vegetation. Some likely communicated using hollow crests that rose gracefully above their heads. Rather than imagining loud roaring sounds, perhaps picture deep, gentle calls rolling across the morning air, allowing members of a herd to remain aware of one another through misty forests or across wide floodplains. The exact sounds have long since disappeared. The earth preserved bones, not voices. Yet the shapes of these remarkable crests suggest they may once have carried sound in surprisingly beautiful ways. As you watch these ancient herds wandering together, another comforting thought quietly appears. Very few animals live entirely alone. Whether today or millions of years ago, life often becomes safer when shared. The youngest individuals could remain surrounded by larger adults. Older animals may have remembered familiar pathways leading toward rivers during dry seasons. A herd does not simply offer protection. It also carries memory, knowledge passed silently from one generation to the next through everyday movement. Even the ground beneath their feet quietly recorded those journeys. In several places around the world, scientists have discovered long pathways of fossilized footprints preserved within ancient stone. Some tracks belong to enormous adults. Others, much smaller, remain nestled safely between them. No photograph exists of those distant afternoons. No written history tells us exactly what happened. Yet the earth itself remembered enough to leave gentle clues. A family walking together. A herd crossing soft mud after rain. Tiny feet following larger ones toward water beneath a warm Cretaceous sky. Perhaps that is one of the loveliest gifts fossils offer us. Not certainty, but quiet glimpses, small moments that survived while countless others gently disappeared into time. Across these peaceful landscapes, the great herbivores continued their endless search for leaves, flowers, and tender shoots. Rarely aware that somewhere beyond the forests, other dinosaurs watched with patient eyes, perfectly adapted to a very different way of life, yet no less a part of the same delicate balance that had shaped this ancient world for millions upon millions of years. As another gentle morning unfolded across the Cretaceous world, the great herds continued their quiet journey. The horned dinosaurs lowered their heads toward fields of soft vegetation. The armored travelers wandered patiently beneath scattered trees. Duck-billed herds drifted across broad floodplains, their footsteps leaving gentle impressions in damp earth that, in rare places, would remain hidden for millions of years. Life moved with remarkable calm. Even in a world filled with enormous animals, most days passed without urgency. The forests breathed. The rivers flowed. The wind carried the scent of leaves warmed by the morning sun. Yet somewhere beyond the edge of those peaceful herds, another rhythm quietly unfolded. Not louder, not more important, simply different. Imagine standing beneath the shade of a tall conifer as sunlight filters gently through its branches. Far away, a single branch bends. A flock of small birds suddenly lifts into the air. For a brief moment, the forest becomes perfectly still. Then, between the trees, a large figure slowly appears. It does not rush. It does not roar. It simply walks. One careful step, then another. This is Tyrannosaurus rex, one of the most famous animals ever to live. Its name has become almost legendary, yet the real animal was likely very different from the fierce monster often imagined in films. Like every creature that has ever lived, It spent most of its life doing remarkably ordinary things: searching for food, resting, drinking, walking, watching, raising young perhaps, and greeting another sunrise beneath the changing sky. Its enormous body was not built for constant pursuit. Rather, it was built for patience. Imagine an experienced owl sitting quietly in a tree. Hours may pass before it moves. Yet during that time, it notices almost everything around it. Large predators often conserve energy because unnecessary effort is costly. Every movement has meaning. Every step matters. Scientists believe Tyrannosaurus rex possessed one of the strongest senses of smell known among land animals. Rather than imagining complicated scientific measurements, picture the gentle aroma of fresh rain reaching you long before the clouds arrive overhead, or think about the comforting smell of warm bread drifting from a nearby kitchen before you ever see the loaf itself. Scent quietly carries stories across the air. For a large hunter, those invisible stories could reveal the presence of food many miles away. Sometimes that food may have been an injured animal, sometimes an animal that had already died naturally, sometimes an opportunity that required no chase at all. Nature rarely wastes what it is given. For many years, scientists debated whether Tyrannosaurus rex hunted actively or simply fed upon animals that had already died. Today, many researchers believe the answer was probably both. Modern bears do both. Modern lions do both. Even many birds gladly accept an easy meal when they find one. The ancient world was likely no different. An opportunity discovered peacefully is often better than one earned through unnecessary struggle. Its jaws have become the subject of countless scientific studies. Powerful muscles surrounded an enormous skull, allowing it to bite with extraordinary force. But rather than imagining violence, imagine something much simpler. Picture a strong pair of garden shears trimming thick branches that smaller tools could never cut. The strength exists not for destruction itself, but because the task requires it. Nature shapes bodies according to the work they must perform. Even the strongest bite tells a story of adaptation rather than aggression. Its eyes also faced forward, giving it excellent depth perception. If you have ever reached toward a cup resting on a table without needing to guess its distance, you have quietly relied upon the same basic advantage. Seeing the world in 3 dimensions allows movement to become more accurate, calmer, and more efficient. Once again, nature solved a practical problem with quiet elegance. Not every remarkable hunter grew to enormous size. Across parts of ancient Asia lived a much smaller relative, known today as Velociraptor. Many people picture this animal as tall and imposing. In reality, it stood only about as high as a large turkey. Its body was light, its movements were graceful, and perhaps most surprising of all, it almost certainly wore feathers. Imagine watching a clever bird running across the forest floor. Its feathers ripple gently with each movement. Its long tail helps maintain perfect balance as it turns. Its bright eyes remain focused upon every tiny movement among fallen leaves. That image is probably much closer to reality than the oversized creatures often shown in popular films. The discovery of feathered dinosaurs has transformed the way we imagine these ancient hunters. Feathers were not unusual exceptions. Across many members of this remarkable family, they became increasingly common. Some animals wore only simple fuzzy coverings. Others carried elegant feathers along their arms and tails. Nature continued refining the same beautiful idea across millions of years. Scientists also continue exploring how these intelligent hunters behaved. Some fossils have inspired the idea that certain species may have hunted together. It is an intriguing possibility, though the evidence is still being carefully discussed. Perhaps some worked in small groups, perhaps many hunted alone. The Earth has preserved wonderful clues, but it has not answered every question. There is something rather comforting about that. Even after generations of careful research, nature still keeps a few quiet secrets. The more we discover, the more gently curious we become. Perhaps that quiet curiosity is one of science's greatest strengths. Not the certainty of knowing everything, but the patience to keep listening. As the afternoon sunlight slowly shifted across the forest floor, the great hunters continued their peaceful routines. A Tyrannosaurus rex disappeared between distant trees. A feathered hunter paused beside a fallen log before quietly moving on. The grazing herds continued feeding. Birds settled among branches. Insects drifted above flowering plants. Predators and herbivores, forests and rivers, flowers and insects. Everything remained connected. No creature existed alone. Every life depended, in some quiet way, upon countless others. That delicate balance had taken millions upon millions of years to develop. Yet beyond the forests, beyond the valleys, and far beyond the blue sky itself, another traveler was already moving silently through the darkness of space, carrying with it a future that no living creature on Earth could possibly imagine. The forests slowly faded behind you, not because they disappeared, but because your quiet journey continued beyond their familiar shade. The rivers that had carried fallen leaves toward distant valleys continued flowing until their waters met broad inland seas. The gentle hills softened into long coastlines, where warm waves arrived without hurry, touching ancient beaches before quietly returning to the open water. If you stood there at sunrise, the air would feel different. The scent of damp earth would slowly give way to the fresh smell of salt, carried on a gentle breeze. The forest had been filled with towering trees. Here the horizon seemed endless, sky above, sea below, and between them life unfolded with the same patient rhythm that had guided the forests for millions upon millions of years. It is easy to imagine that the age of dinosaurs belonged only to creatures walking upon the land. Yet the Earth has never separated its stories so neatly. The forests, the skies, and the oceans were all chapters of the same quiet book, each gently influencing the others. If you looked upward, you might notice elegant shapes circling high above the coastline. At first glance, they resemble enormous birds. Their wings remain stretched wide, as warm air gently lifts them higher without a single wing beat. They seem almost effortless. These remarkable creatures are often mistaken for dinosaurs. In truth, they followed a neighboring branch upon the great family tree of life. Scientists call them pterosaurs, though you do not need to remember the name. It is enough to think of them as ancient flying reptiles, close cousins of the dinosaurs, sharing the same world but following their own extraordinary path. Their wings were unlike the feathered wings of birds. Imagine gently opening your hand. Now picture a thin, flexible membrane stretching from one greatly elongated finger all the way to the side of the body, forming a broad surface that could catch the moving air. Rather than countless feathers overlapping one another, these animals relied upon a smooth wing, almost like a beautifully crafted sail, catching a steady breeze. Many spent long hours gliding. Why flap continuously when the wind is willing to help? Even today, large seabirds often spend much of the day floating upon invisible rivers of rising warm air. The ancient flying reptiles likely traveled in much the same graceful way. Nature has always appreciated the simplest solution. Some were no larger than modern seabirds. Others became astonishingly large. The greatest among them stood as tall as a giraffe when resting upon the ground, yet once they entered the air, their enormous wings allowed them to soar with remarkable elegance. Imagine watching one glide above the coastline during the golden light of evening. Its shadow passes silently across quiet waves. Fish swim below. The wind carries it onward. For long moments, it hardly seems to move at all. It simply becomes part of the sky. Although they ruled the air long before modern birds became widespread, these flying reptiles were not masters of every corner of the heavens. Small feathered birds had already begun exploring their own ways of flying. Some darted quickly between trees. Others skimmed across lakes, searching for insects. For millions of years, both groups shared the same skies, each quietly occupying its own place, without replacing the other overnight. Nature seldom erases one idea the moment another appears. Instead, old and new often exist together for ages beyond imagination. Now let your gaze slowly lower from the sky toward the sea. The surface appears peaceful. Gentle waves rise and fall beneath the morning light. Nothing suggests that beneath them lives another world entirely. The oceans of the Cretaceous were not ruled by dinosaurs. Instead, they belonged to an astonishing collection of marine reptiles, each descended from land-dwelling ancestors that had gradually returned to the water over immense stretches of time. Their story reminds us that evolution is never a straight road. Sometimes life leaves the sea. Sometimes, millions of years later, it quietly returns. One family became wonderfully streamlined. Imagine the graceful body of a modern dolphin, moving effortlessly through the water. Ancient reptiles known today as ichthyosaurs developed remarkably similar shapes. Not because they were closely related to dolphins, but because water gently encourages certain forms to appear again and again. When different branches of life discover similar solutions to the same challenge, it feels almost as though nature is quietly repeating one of its favorite ideas. Elsewhere drifted another remarkable group. Their bodies remained broad and strong, while extraordinarily long necks carried small heads through calm coastal waters. These were the plesiosaurs. Imagine watching a swan gliding peacefully across a quiet lake. Now imagine that graceful neck belonging to an ancient marine reptile, moving through a warm inland sea. The comparison is not perfect, but it captures something important. Even unfamiliar animals often move in ways that still feel strangely familiar. Near the end of the age of dinosaurs, another remarkable hunter entered the oceans. Scientists call these animals mosasaurs. They grew into impressive predators, yet they too were simply part of the balance that shaped ancient seas. Like sharks today, they filled an important role without ruling every moment of ocean life. Most days beneath the waves were likely quite ordinary. Schools of fish shimmered beneath the sunlight. Small shellfish rested upon the seafloor. Ancient relatives of squid drifted through open water. Sea turtles paddled gently between coastal shallows and deeper currents. Life, once again, revolved around simple routines repeated across countless generations. The oceans did not exist apart from the forests. Rivers carried nutrients from distant mountains into shallow seas. Coastal plants helped stabilize shorelines. Flying reptiles searched for fish near river mouths. Even the smallest insects sometimes became food for birds that later rested beside the water's edge. Every part of the planet quietly supported every other part. Perhaps that is the most comforting lesson hidden within these ancient worlds. Nothing truly lived alone. Every breeze connected sky and forest. Every river connected mountain and sea. Every living creature belonged to a larger story stretching far beyond itself. As evening slowly settled across the coastline, the last golden light touched the wings of soaring reptiles before fading into deep blue twilight. The oceans continued breathing beneath the stars. The forests rested beyond the distant hills, and hidden among flowers, beneath fallen leaves, and inside quiet burrows, many of the smallest inhabitants of this remarkable world were preparing to begin another ordinary night. Small lives whose gentle stories would prove surprisingly important in the ages still to come. As evening settled gently over the ancient coastline, the great flying reptiles slowly disappeared into the fading light. The warm sea continued its endless breathing, lifting and lowering gentle waves beneath the first quiet stars. If you turned away from the open water and followed a winding river inland once more, the world would gradually become quieter, not because life was disappearing, quite the opposite. It was becoming smaller. Sometimes, the greatest stories hide where we are least likely to look. When people imagine the age of dinosaurs, they often picture enormous footprints, towering necks, or powerful jaws. Yet if you had truly wandered through this ancient world, much of what surrounded you would have been wonderfully familiar. Tiny insects drifting through warm afternoon air, small animals rustling beneath fallen leaves, flowers opening slowly to greet the morning light. The earth has always belonged to the small as much as the large, perhaps even more so. By the time the Cretaceous world reached its fullest richness, flowering plants had quietly spread across many landscapes. They did not replace the older forests overnight. Ancient conifers still stood proudly across hillsides. Tree ferns continued unfurling delicate green fronds. Cycads remained faithful companions of warm valleys. The newcomers simply joined the conversation. One flower here, another beside a stream, a cluster of blossoms beneath the edge of a forest. The world slowly learned new colors. Imagine walking through a quiet meadow just after sunrise. Drops of dew rest upon delicate petals. The air carries a faint sweetness, almost too gentle to describe. Nothing appears extraordinary. Yet beneath that peaceful beauty, countless tiny partnerships quietly unfold. A beetle pauses upon a flower. Tiny grains of golden dust cling softly to its body. When it wanders onward to another blossom, it unknowingly carries those grains with it. A little later, an early bee follows a similar journey, searching only for food, never realizing that every visit quietly helps another flower produce seeds for future generations. No creature gives instructions. No meeting is held. No plan is announced. Each simply follows its own ordinary day. Yet together, they quietly transform entire forests. Nature often performs its greatest miracles without asking anyone to notice. Every flower depends upon another traveler. Sometimes it is a beetle, sometimes a bee, sometimes even the gentle wind itself carries tiny grains from one blossom to another. Each journey seems almost insignificant, but millions of tiny journeys slowly reshape the living world. It is comforting to remember that enormous change can begin with the smallest movements. The flowers offered more than beauty. They produced fruits, seeds, and tender leaves that became food for countless animals. New insects appeared. Old insects discovered new opportunities. Birds found fresh places to feed. Even the great herds of herbivorous dinosaurs benefited from landscapes that became increasingly rich and varied. Everything remained connected. One flower nourished an insect. One insect helped another flower. A plant fed a dinosaur. A dinosaur left behind seeds carried within the soil. The cycle quietly continued. Perhaps the Earth has always been less like a collection of separate lives and more like a single long conversation, spoken through leaves, rivers, sunlight, and time. Hidden beneath this flourishing landscape lived another group of animals, whose story would one day become deeply familiar to us: the earliest mammals. If you hope to find them, you would need patience. They were not giants crossing open plains. Most were small enough to disappear beneath a fallen branch or inside the hollow of an old tree. Many likely became active only after darkness settled across the land. As the great dinosaurs rested, these tiny creatures quietly emerged. Imagine a cool evening beneath the forest canopy. Moonlight filters gently through the branches above. The air has grown comfortably cool after the warmth of the day. Among scattered leaves, a tiny furry animal cautiously steps forward. Its nose twitches gently as it searches for insects, seeds, or fallen fruit. Large eyes help it navigate the darkness. Soft fur helps preserve warmth through the night. It asks very little from the world. Only enough food for another day. Only a safe place to rest before morning returns. Some early mammals climbed trees with surprising agility. Others dug quiet burrows beneath the earth, creating small underground homes where they remained protected from changing weather and larger animals. Still others glided from branch to branch using thin folds of skin stretched gently between their limbs, drifting silently through the forest like falling leaves caught upon a gentle breeze. They lived modest lives. No one looking at them could have guessed what distant future awaited their descendants. History rarely announces itself in advance. It often begins with creatures so ordinary that they almost disappear into the background. The same was true for the earliest birds. Although birds had already begun separating from their dinosaur ancestors, they remained only one small part of an incredibly diverse world. Many still carried features reminding us of where they had come from. Some retained tiny claws upon their wings while young. Others carried long tails unlike those of most modern birds. Evolution continued its patient work, smoothing old shapes into new ones over millions of years. Nothing hurried. Nothing skipped ahead. Everything unfolded with remarkable calm. If you listened closely during one of those ancient evenings, the forest might sound surprisingly peaceful. Insects created a soft chorus beneath the leaves. Tiny mammals rustled quietly among fallen branches. Small birds settled into safe places before dawn. Far away, enormous herbivores continued grazing beneath moonlit skies. Even the great predators moved more quietly than popular stories often suggest. Most nights passed without drama. Life was simply living. Perhaps that is the truest picture of the age of dinosaurs. Not endless danger, not constant struggle, but countless ordinary days gently following one another across millions upon millions of years. Meals shared, young raised, flowers blooming, rain falling, rivers flowing. The extraordinary quietly hidden inside the ordinary. As another sunrise slowly prepared itself beyond the eastern horizon, every creature, from the smallest insect resting inside a flower to the largest dinosaur sleeping beneath ancient trees, would soon begin another familiar day. And within those ordinary days, they laughed in their own silent ways, rested in their own quiet ways, searched, wandered, cared for their young, and left behind tiny traces of lives that science is still patiently learning to understand. As another morning quietly unfolded across the Cretaceous landscape, sunlight slowly filtered through the branches of ancient trees, warming the broad leaves that had collected cool drops of dew during the night. The rivers continued flowing exactly as they had yesterday. Flowers opened once again. Insects resumed their patient journeys from blossom to blossom. Birds greeted the morning with soft calls carried gently through the forest, and the dinosaurs awoke to another perfectly ordinary day. Perhaps that is the easiest detail to forget. When we think about dinosaurs, we often imagine the extraordinary, the tallest, the fastest, the strongest. Yet almost every day of their long history was probably wonderfully uneventful. Like deer grazing in a quiet meadow, like elephants crossing a distant plain, like birds building nests outside your own window. Most of life is made not from dramatic moments, but from peaceful routines repeated again and again. Imagine following a single family of plant-eating dinosaurs from sunrise until evening. The youngest members remain close to the adults, not because anyone gives spoken instructions, but because staying together simply feels safe. The herd moves slowly toward fresh patches of vegetation. Older animals pause often, allowing the smallest to keep pace. There is no rush, only the gentle rhythm of walking. Step, pause, another mouthful of leaves, another quiet breath. The earth beneath their feet remembers every movement. On rare occasions, soft mud hardens before rain can wash it away. Layer after layer of sand and sediment slowly covers those footprints until, millions of years later, stone quietly preserves them. Today, scientists sometimes discover long pathways where enormous footprints walk beside much smaller ones. No photograph survives. No written diary explains what happened. Yet those silent tracks gently suggest something familiar. Families, shared journeys, young animals learning familiar paths by following those who walked before them. It is remarkable how much the earth remembers without ever speaking a word. As spring returned each year, many dinosaurs likely searched for suitable places to build nests. Imagine a broad sandy riverbank warmed by the gentle sunshine. A mother carefully scrapes a shallow hollow into the ground using her strong feet. She lowers herself with great care. One by one, smooth eggs are laid within the nest. Not hurried, not carelessly, simply one quiet movement after another. For many years, scientists believe dinosaurs may have laid their eggs and immediately disappeared into the surrounding landscape. The fossils have gradually revealed a gentler story. In several remarkable discoveries, adults have been found resting directly above their nests, almost frozen in the act of protecting eggs that would never hatch. It is a deeply peaceful image. A parent waiting, the forest changing around them, rain falling, sunlight returning, day after day, even after millions of years. That quiet act of care remains visible within the stone. One particularly famous plant-eating dinosaur has helped scientists better understand this behavior. Its scientific name is Maiasaura, which means good mother lizard. You do not need to remember the name. The meaning itself tells the story. Fossils of nests, eggs, tiny hatchlings, and growing young suggest that these animals may have cared for their offspring for some time after they emerged from their shells. The smallest dinosaurs were not immediately ready to wander across the world. Like many young animals today, they likely depended upon older family members while they slowly grew stronger. Nature has repeated this gentle pattern for countless millions of years. Care creates opportunity. Opportunity allows life to continue. Communication may also have been quieter and more subtle than we often imagine. Popular stories sometimes fill the ancient forests with enormous roaring sounds that echo from one mountain to another. The truth is that we simply do not know exactly what dinosaur voices sounded like. Soft tissues that produce sound rarely become fossils. The earth preserves bones far more easily than voices, yet bones can still offer gentle clues. Some duck-billed dinosaurs carried long, hollow crests upon their heads. Imagine blowing softly across the opening of a wooden flute. Different shapes create different notes. Those graceful crests may have worked in much the same way, allowing deep calls to travel through forests or across wide floodplains. Not loud enough to terrify the world, perhaps simply clear enough to help a family remain together, a parent calling to a youngster, a herd finding one another through morning mist. Nature often favors communication over conflict. Modern science has also begun uncovering tiny traces of ancient colors. For generations, people imagined every dinosaur covered in dull gray or green skin. That was never more than an educated guess. Today, certain exceptionally preserved fossils contain microscopic structures that once held pigments. Rather than thinking about complicated laboratory techniques, imagine tiny specks of color quietly sleeping inside the rock for millions of years, waiting patiently until careful scientists learned how to recognize them. Those tiny traces suggest that some feathered dinosaurs may have worn reddish browns, glossy blacks, soft grays, or striped patterns. Why would colors matter? Sometimes they helped an animal disappear among shadows. Sometimes they made individuals easier to recognize. Sometimes they quietly signaled health during the breeding season, much as brightly colored birds continue to do today. Even beauty has always been part of nature's story. As afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, the pace of life remained wonderfully gentle. Young dinosaurs rested in the shade, while adults continued feeding. Predators conserved energy beneath cool trees instead of wandering endlessly. Small mammals emerged briefly before retreating once more beneath fallen logs. Birds preened their feathers with patient care. The forest breathed in slow, familiar rhythms. Perhaps this ordinary rhythm is the greatest surprise of all. The age of dinosaurs lasted for well over 160 million years. Such an unimaginably long span of time could never have been sustained by constant excitement. It endured because most days were peaceful. Most mornings resembled the mornings before them. Most evenings settled gently into night beneath familiar stars. Life continued through quiet repetition. One generation replacing another. One nest replacing another. One footprint following another across soft ground. And perhaps there is something comforting in realizing that even the greatest creatures ever to walk upon the earth spent most of their lives simply living. As darkness gradually settled once again across forests, rivers, and flowering meadows, the ancient world seemed complete. No creature beneath those stars could have imagined that far beyond the blue sky, beyond the moon, and beyond the silent paths of wandering planets, a small wandering world of stone had already begun a journey that would one day bring this long and peaceful chapter to its gentle, irreversible close. The morning began like so many others. The sun rose slowly above the eastern horizon, sending warm light across broad rivers, quiet forests, and endless meadows filled with ancient plants. Soft mist lingered above the water before quietly dissolving into the growing warmth of the day. Nothing suggested that this morning would be remembered differently from the millions that had come before it. The flowers opened as they always did. Tiny insects continued their patient journeys from blossom to blossom, carrying invisible gifts that helped new seeds slowly take shape. The great herds of plant-eating dinosaurs wandered across open plains, lowering their heads toward fresh leaves glistening with dew. Birds, small descendants of much older dinosaur families, fluttered between branches, greeting another ordinary sunrise. Even the great predators moved without urgency. Some rested beneath the shade of ancient trees. Others walked slowly along familiar paths beside winding rivers. Most creatures, as on every other day, spent far more time resting than running. Life followed its quiet rhythm. The earth turned gently beneath the morning sky. The forests breathed. The oceans rose and fell. Nothing hurried. If you had stood upon a gentle hillside overlooking this peaceful landscape, you would almost certainly have believed that tomorrow would look much the same. The ancient world had endured for more than 160 million years. Entire mountain ranges had slowly risen and worn away. Coastlines had drifted across the face of the planet. Countless generations had been born, grown old, and quietly disappeared. Everything seemed wonderfully steady. Yet far beyond the blue sky, beyond the wandering moon, and far beyond the familiar paths followed by the planets, another traveler had already begun a journey that no living creature could see. It carried no intention, no anger, no purpose. It simply followed the quiet laws that guide everything moving through space. Scientists believe this traveler was an enormous mountain of stone, drifting silently through the darkness for countless millions of years, before its path finally crossed that of the Earth. For nearly all of its journey, it traveled through perfect silence. There was no wind, no sound, only endless darkness stretching in every direction. Then, almost imperceptibly, the Earth drew nearer. At first, nothing changed. The traveler continued forward, exactly as it always had. But as it approached our planet, Earth's gravity, the gentle pull that keeps oceans upon the land, and the moon in its distant path, began quietly guiding the wandering stone toward the world below. Still, no one on Earth noticed. The forests remained peaceful. The rivers continued flowing. Somewhere, a young dinosaur followed the careful footsteps of its parents. Somewhere else, a feathered hunter paused to watch insects dancing above a patch of flowers. The day continued. Then, high above the atmosphere, something changed. If you had happened to glance toward the daylight sky at exactly the right moment, perhaps you would have noticed what looked like an unusually bright star appearing where no star should be visible. Small, distant, easy to overlook. Minute by minute, however, the point of light slowly grew brighter. Not suddenly, not explosively, simply brighter. As the great stone entered the upper layers of the atmosphere, the air before it could no longer move aside quickly enough. Instead, it became tightly compressed, growing hotter and brighter, until the traveler itself appeared wrapped in brilliant light. The sky seemed to gain a second sun, not because another star had appeared, but because one lonely mountain of stone had begun an unimaginably fast meeting with the Earth. Its path carried it toward a warm, shallow sea that covered part of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in present-day Mexico. No dinosaur knew that name. No forest recognized the place. To every living creature, it was simply another peaceful coastline beneath another ordinary sky. The moment of impact lasted less than the blink of an eye. The wandering stone met the Earth. Rock met rock. The energy released was beyond anything human history has ever witnessed. Rather than trying to imagine impossible numbers, picture something simpler. Imagine dropping a single pebble into the still surface of a quiet pond. The pebble disappears. Ripples spread gently outward in every direction. Now imagine the Earth itself becoming that pond. Only instead of gentle circles upon water, enormous waves of energy began spreading through the land, the oceans, and the atmosphere. Near the place of impact, the ground itself changed almost instantly. Ancient rocks melted. New rocks formed. A vast hollow was carved into the earth, so enormous that it remains hidden beneath younger layers of rock even today. Scientists call this ancient scar the Chicxulub crater, named after a nearby modern town. You do not need to remember the name. It is enough to know that the Earth still quietly carries the memory of that day. Far beyond the impact itself, the sky continued changing. Brilliant fragments of glowing rock were thrown high above the atmosphere, before slowly falling back toward the planet. As they returned, they warmed the air across enormous distances, much like countless tiny embers drifting back toward a quiet campfire after rising into the night. Forests far from the impact began to glow with scattered points of light. Dry leaves caught gentle flames. Fallen branches smoldered. In many places, fire spread where the land had already grown dry beneath the warmth of the season. Meanwhile, across distant coastlines, the oceans responded. The sea does not remain perfectly still when something immense disturbs its floor. Great walls of water slowly formed, rolling outward across ancient coastlines. Some waves traveled for many hours before reaching distant shores. Long after the bright light had faded from the sky, the oceans were still quietly carrying the memory of the impact. Even the air itself seemed to move differently. A powerful wall of moving air spread outward across forests and plains, bending trees, carrying dust, and continuing far beyond places where no creature had ever seen the brilliant light itself. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is not the force, it is the silence that followed. After the brightness, after the distant trembling, after the winds had passed, the earth continued turning. The sun continued its slow journey across the sky. Evening still arrived. Darkness still settled gently over rivers and forests. But something had changed. The familiar rhythm of the ancient world had been quietly interrupted. No creature yet understood how deeply. As night slowly covered the land once more, fine particles continued rising high into the atmosphere, carried upward until they drifted beyond the reach of ordinary weather. There, they began a much longer journey, one that would unfold not over moments, but over days, weeks, months, and years. The earth had entered a silence unlike any it had known before. Night settled over the earth once again. At first, it seemed almost ordinary. The stars still appeared above the ancient forests. Rivers continued their patient journey toward distant seas. Gentle waves still reached familiar shorelines before quietly returning to the open water. From one evening to the next, the planet itself had not forgotten how to turn. The earth continued its slow dance around the sun. The moon continued rising. The winds still wandered across valleys and mountains. Yet high above the clouds, something new had begun. Tiny particles of rock, ash, and dust had been lifted into the upper reaches of the atmosphere by the great impact. They drifted so high that ordinary rain could not quickly bring them back to the ground. Imagine shaking a soft blanket in a quiet room. For a few moments, tiny specks float gently through the air before slowly settling again. Now imagine that blanket stretching across an entire planet. The particles were unimaginably small. Each one alone seemed insignificant. Together, they slowly changed the sky. The first day passed. Morning arrived, but the sunlight felt different. Its warmth seemed softer. Its brightness slightly muted, as though a thin veil had been gently placed across the heavens. The forests noticed nothing all at once. Flowers still opened, birds still flew, dinosaurs continued searching for food. Life always begins each new day with quiet hope. Then another day passed, and another. The gentle veil above the earth gradually became thicker. More sunlight was reflected back into space before it could reach the ground below. The afternoons grew dimmer. Shadows softened. The familiar warmth of the sun became increasingly difficult to feel. It was not permanent night. Rather, it resembled the quiet light that lingers beneath heavy clouds on a winter afternoon, when the world feels calm, muted, and strangely still. As the days slowly became weeks, the forests began to change. Leaves that once reached eagerly toward the sunlight found less energy arriving each morning. Flowers opened less often. Fresh growth slowed. Plants cannot simply walk somewhere brighter. They patiently wait for the light to return. Many waited as long as they could. Some could wait no longer. One quiet leaf falling to the ground changes very little. 1,000 leaves seem ordinary. But when forests across continents slowly lose their ability to renew themselves, the entire rhythm of life begins to soften. The great plant-eating dinosaurs wandered farther than before. Each day required a little more searching. A river valley that once offered abundant food now provided only scattered patches of green. The herds continued walking, patiently, calmly, as they always had. The earth itself had taught every living creature persistence. Yet even persistence has limits when the forests grow quieter with every passing season. Where the great herbivores struggled, the hunters quietly felt the change as well. Not because they had suddenly become weaker, but because every hunter depends upon those it hunts. Nature is like a great woven tapestry. When one thread begins to loosen, the neighboring threads gently shift with it. The pattern does not disappear immediately. It changes gradually, almost imperceptibly. One quiet absence leads to another. Meanwhile, far beyond the forests, the oceans were living through their own slow transformation. From the shore, the sea still appeared peaceful. Gentle waves continued rising and falling beneath gray skies. Yet beneath the surface, the smallest lives were quietly struggling. Tiny drifting organisms floated near the sunlit waters. These microscopic communities are so small that countless millions could rest upon your fingertip. They ask for very little. Only water, only nutrients, only sunlight. When the sunlight faded, many could no longer continue their quiet work. Imagine extinguishing a single candle inside a vast cathedral. The darkness changes very little. Now imagine thousands of candles slowly disappearing, one after another. Eventually, the entire hall grows dim. The smallest ocean life formed the quiet foundation upon which much larger lives depended. As those tiny drifting communities declined, small fish found less to eat. Larger fish followed. Marine reptiles searched wider stretches of ocean. Ancient sea turtles continued swimming through waters that gradually became less familiar than before. Everything remained connected. The forests, the rivers, the oceans, the sky. Life had always depended upon those invisible connections. Rain also changed. As particles drifted through the atmosphere, some returned to Earth mixed with rainwater, making certain storms harsher than those that had fallen before. You need not imagine violent weather. Instead, picture gentle rain carrying unfamiliar minerals gathered during its long journey through the dusty sky. Scientists believe some rainfall during this time became more acidic than usual, placing additional stress upon already struggling forests and lakes. It was never one single event that transformed the planet. It was many quiet changes, arriving together. Weeks became months. Months slowly became years. The air cooled. Morning frost reached places where it had rarely appeared before. Some rivers flowed more slowly. Entire landscapes that had once echoed with countless voices gradually settled into unfamiliar silence. Yet even during these quiet years, the earth never stopped turning. Each sunrise still arrived. Each evening still followed. Clouds continued drifting overhead. The stars remained exactly where they had always been. The planet itself endured. Life, however, was slowly learning that the world it had known for more than 160 million years was gently slipping away. Perhaps the saddest part of this story is also its gentlest. There was no single moment when every dinosaur disappeared, no final afternoon, no last sunset shared by all. Different places changed at different times. Different families endured for different lengths of time. Some valleys remained green longer than others. Some rivers continued supporting life, while distant forests had already grown quiet. The ending unfolded slowly enough that no creature could have recognized it while living through it. Only much later would the story become clear. As the years continued their patient passage, the great forests grew quieter than they had ever been before. Many familiar footsteps no longer crossed the muddy riverbanks. Many familiar calls no longer drifted through the evening air. And yet, hidden among fallen branches, resting inside sheltered burrows, perched quietly within the remaining trees, a few small survivors continued greeting each new morning. They carried no knowledge that they were preserving one of the oldest stories life had ever written. They simply continued living, one quiet day at a time. The years continued to pass. The earth still turned beneath the sun, with the same quiet certainty it had always known. Morning followed night. Spring followed winter. Rain still found its way back to rivers, and rivers still searched patiently for the sea. The planet itself had survived. But the living world had become quieter than it had been for countless millions of years. The great herds that once wandered endless plains had slowly faded from the landscape. The towering giants no longer reached into the treetops. The armored travelers no longer crossed broad valleys. The powerful hunters that had once walked beneath ancient forests had quietly disappeared from the living world. Their footprints remained, their bones remained, their story remained. But the animals themselves had gently become part of the Earth's memory. Yet the story of life had not ended. It rarely does. Nature has an extraordinary habit of continuing, even after its hardest chapters. If you wandered through one of those recovering forests many years after the Great Impact, you would probably notice something surprising. The world no longer belonged to the largest creatures. Instead, it belonged to the smallest. Imagine a quiet morning after a long winter. Fresh green shoots slowly emerge through damp soil. A tiny bird lands upon a fallen branch. A small furry animal cautiously steps out from its shelter. The forest is quieter than before, yet it is not empty. It is beginning again. Among the survivors were the earliest birds. Long before the Great Extinction, they had already been living quietly among the forests, often overlooked beside their much larger dinosaur relatives. Their bodies were small. They required less food than giant animals. Many could fly from one place to another in search of new sources of nourishment. Some fed on seeds that remained hidden beneath the soil. Others searched for insects among fallen leaves. Their flexibility quietly became one of their greatest strengths. It was not because they were stronger. It was because they asked less from a world that suddenly had much less to offer. That quiet lesson appears again and again throughout the history of life. Sometimes, survival belongs not to the largest or the fastest, but to those able to adapt when the world changes around them. Nearby, small mammals continued their own patient lives. For millions of years they had lived almost unnoticed beneath the feet of dinosaurs. Now, without planning it, they found themselves surrounded by opportunities that had never existed before. Most remained small, some climbed trees, others searched beneath fallen logs. Many lived inside burrows that sheltered them from changing weather and protected them during difficult times. Those simple underground homes may have offered safety during the long months when the surface of the earth became colder and food became more difficult to find. Imagine a tiny family resting together inside a warm burrow, while cold winds quietly move through the forest above. The shelter is simple. The world outside remains uncertain, yet life continues peacefully within. Nature often hides its greatest resilience in the smallest places. Other ancient survivors quietly continued their own familiar routines. Crocodilians rested beside rivers much as their ancestors had done for millions of years. Their slow metabolism allowed them to survive long periods with very little food, waiting patiently until conditions improved. Freshwater turtles settled into muddy ponds where life recovered more quickly than in many other environments. Even some amphibians quietly endured, sheltered within streams and wetlands that still offered protection when forests struggled. Many kinds of ferns also returned with remarkable determination. If you have ever seen green plants quietly appear after a forest fire, you have already witnessed something similar. Fern spores are astonishingly resilient. They travel lightly upon the wind, waiting patiently for favorable conditions before beginning again. In many places, the recovering earth briefly became a world of ferns. Soft green carpets spread across the landscape long before forests fully returned. It was almost as though nature had chosen one of its oldest companions to gently begin the work of healing. Scientists continue asking an important question. Why did the non-avian dinosaurs disappear while birds survived? There is probably no single answer. Instead, many quiet reasons seem to have worked together. Small bodies required less food. Flexible diets allowed some animals to eat seeds, insects, or whatever nourishment remained available. The ability to fly opened pathways toward new habitats. Shorter generations allowed populations to recover more quickly when conditions improved. Nature rarely depends upon one perfect solution. It quietly gathers many small advantages, just as it had done when the first dinosaurs began their own journey more than 160 million years earlier. There is something beautifully symmetrical about that. The dinosaurs had once risen through countless small advantages. Now another chapter of life continued through the same quiet principle: adaptation, patience, change. The Earth itself remained the same planet. The mountains still reached toward the sky. The oceans still reflected the moon. The stars still crossed the night exactly as they always had. Only the living voices had changed. Millions of years slowly passed. Forests gradually returned. Flowers once again spread across valleys. Insects resumed their endless journeys between blossoms. Birds became increasingly diverse, filling the skies with new songs carried gently on the morning breeze. Without realizing it, they carried an ancient inheritance. Every feather, every hollow bone, every carefully built nest, every song greeting the dawn. Each one quietly echoed a history stretching back to the age of dinosaurs. The giant forms had disappeared. Their smaller descendants had not. Sometimes people say that the dinosaurs became extinct. That sentence is almost true. A gentler way to say it might be this: most dinosaurs disappeared. One remarkable branch continued, the sparrow resting on a garden fence, the owl calling through a quiet evening, the eagle circling high above distant mountains, the robin gathering twigs for its nest. Each belongs to a family whose story began unimaginably long ago. If you stepped outside just before sunrise tomorrow and listened carefully, you might hear a bird welcoming the morning. Its voice would seem perfectly ordinary, soft, familiar, easy to overlook. Yet hidden within that quiet song is one of the oldest stories the Earth has ever carried. The age of dinosaurs did not end completely. It simply learned how to fly. The forests changed. The rivers found new paths. Mountains slowly rose where ancient seas had once shimmered beneath the sun. Millions of years passed with the same gentle patience that had guided every chapter of the Earth's long history. The great dinosaurs no longer walked across open plains, yet the planet had not forgotten them. It remembered quietly, not with words, not with pictures, but with stone. Imagine, for a moment, one peaceful afternoon long before human beings existed. A broad river winds through a warm valley, moving with the same calm rhythm it has followed for countless generations. Nearby, a hadrosaur, one of the gentle duck-billed dinosaurs, wanders slowly along the riverbank. It lowers its head toward fresh vegetation growing beside the water. It drinks. It rests for a while beneath the shade of ancient trees. Nothing remarkable happens. It is simply another ordinary day in an ordinary life. Many years later, after a long life spent wandering forests and floodplains, that same animal quietly reaches the end of its journey. There is no great drama, no final battle. Nature often prefers peaceful endings. Perhaps it lies down beside the river one final time. The wind continues moving through the leaves. The water continues flowing. Birds still cross the evening sky. The earth keeps turning. Gradually, the seasons continue without pause. Rain falls. The river rises. Soft layers of mud slowly gather around the resting body. Leaves drift down from nearby trees. Fine sand settles gently over everything beneath the quiet water. One season becomes another. The body slowly disappears beneath the growing layers of earth. At first, very little seems different. Then the years quietly become centuries. The centuries become thousands of years. The thousands become millions. Deep beneath the surface, something remarkable begins to happen. Water carrying tiny amounts of dissolved minerals slowly moves through the buried bones. Imagine pouring warm wax into the delicate spaces inside an old wooden carving. Little by little, the empty spaces become filled. Not quickly, not forcefully. Simply one tiny drop at a time. The minerals do something similar. Very slowly, they replace parts of the original bone while preserving its shape with extraordinary care. The bone does not become ordinary rock overnight. Instead, it gradually becomes something wonderfully balanced between the two. A memory held inside stone. Nature performs this quiet work with astonishing patience. No one watches. No one hurries the process. The earth simply continues doing what it has always done. Year after year, century after century, million after million years. By now, the ancient river has long since disappeared. New rivers flow across different valleys. Entire mountain ranges have risen where floodplains once stretched beneath warm skies. The world above changes almost beyond recognition. Yet deep underground, the silent memory remains. Not every dinosaur became a fossil. In truth, very few did. Most living things return completely to the great cycles of nature. Their bodies nourish plants. Their bones slowly disappear. Their stories continue only through the lives they once supported. Creating a fossil requires a remarkable combination of quiet good fortune. The body must be buried before weather and scavengers scatter it. The surrounding conditions must remain gentle enough to preserve delicate details. The minerals must arrive patiently over immense spans of time. Perhaps that rarity is one reason fossils feel so precious. Each one is less like an object and more like a message that somehow survived an unimaginably long journey. Sometimes the earth remembers more than bones. Imagine soft mud resting beside a quiet lake after gentle rain. A young dinosaur carefully follows an older member of its family across the damp ground. Each step leaves a shallow impression. Hours later, the surface begins to dry beneath the warm sun. Before wind or water can erase those footprints, another thin layer of fine sediment quietly settles across them. The impressions become hidden, protected, patiently waiting. Over millions of years, those simple footprints harden into stone. Today, scientists sometimes discover long pathways where dozens or even hundreds of ancient footsteps remain frozen in time. They cannot tell us every detail, they cannot reveal every conversation or every sound, yet they whisper gentle clues. A family walking together, a herd moving toward water, a youngster staying close to larger companions. Even silence can leave remarkable evidence behind. Elsewhere, entire groups of bones sometimes gather within the same ancient layers of rock. Scientists call these places bone beds. Rather than imagining a mysterious event, picture a river that flooded many times over thousands of years, gradually bringing together the remains of different animals in one peaceful location. The earth often gathers memories slowly, not all at once. Some fossils reveal something even more touching: a broken bone that healed long before the animal died, an injured foot that continued carrying its owner for many years, a bite mark that slowly closed as new bone quietly formed around it. These ancient injuries tell us something surprisingly gentle. Dinosaurs were not simply names inside books. They healed. They recovered. They continued living ordinary lives after difficult moments, much as animals do today. There is something deeply comforting about that thought. Across millions of years, life has always possessed an extraordinary ability to mend itself whenever possible. As ages continued passing overhead, continents drifted into their familiar places, forests changed into grasslands, ice came and went. Entire civilizations would one day rise without realizing that beneath their feet rested the quiet memories of worlds unimaginably older than their own. The earth had become a vast library, not one filled with paper pages or written words, but with layers of stone, each layer preserving another small chapter, each fossil another sentence, each footprint another whispered memory, waiting patiently for someone gentle enough to notice. And eventually, after more than 60 million years of perfect silence, careful hands carrying small brushes would begin uncovering those ancient memories once again, allowing the forgotten voices of the dinosaurs to quietly return to the sunlight. For more than 60 million years, the Earth kept its quiet promise. The rivers changed course. Mountains slowly rose and slowly wore away again. Forests became grasslands, and grasslands became forests once more. Generations of animals lived and disappeared without ever knowing that beneath the ground rested the quiet memories of another world. The bones waited, not impatiently. Stone has never hurried. If you could imagine those ancient fossils sleeping beneath the earth, they would not seem lonely. They would simply be resting, wrapped in layers of rock, protected by time itself, until someone gentle enough arrived to find them. Eventually, that someone did. Long before satellites looked down upon the earth, before computers helped scientists solve ancient puzzles, curious people had already begun noticing unusual shapes emerging from hillsides and cliffs. A large bone would appear after heavy rain. A strange footprint would be discovered inside a slab of stone. A child walking beside a river might pick up an oddly shaped rock that looked almost too carefully formed to be ordinary. Each discovery began with something wonderfully simple. Someone looked closely. That quiet habit of paying attention has always been one of science's greatest strengths. It is easy to imagine scientific discovery as a moment of sudden excitement, a hidden treasure uncovered in an instant. Yet most discoveries arrive much more gently than that. Imagine a person kneeling quietly beside an ancient cliff. In one hand rests a small brush. In the other, a tiny wooden tool. Grain by grain, they remove the surrounding dust, not because they wish to hurry, but because every movement matters. A single careless motion could erase details that have survived for tens of millions of years. Patience becomes the most valuable instrument of all. The first people to study dinosaurs understood only a small part of the story. Many imagined them as enormous, slow-moving reptiles that spent their lives wandering through swamps with heavy, dragging bodies. Given the evidence available at the time, that picture seemed reasonable. Science rarely begins with perfect answers. It begins with the best understanding available, and then quietly improves as new evidence appears. One of the most important changes came during the middle of the 20th century, when a growing number of scientists began looking at dinosaur fossils with fresh eyes. Among them was a paleontologist named John Ostrom. While studying the skeleton of a small predator called Deinonychus, he noticed something remarkable. Its body was light. Its legs were built for movement. Its arms and shoulders suggested an active, energetic animal, rather than a sluggish reptile. Those careful observations helped inspire what scientists now sometimes call the dinosaur renaissance. The name sounds dramatic, yet the idea behind it is wonderfully calm. Researchers slowly began realizing that many dinosaurs were far more active, intelligent, and bird-like than people had once imagined. No single fossil caused this change. No single discovery solved every mystery. Instead, hundreds of careful observations quietly gathered together until a clearer picture slowly emerged. Science often changes its mind, not through sudden revolutions, but through patient accumulation. Like watching morning mist slowly lift from a valley. The landscape was always there. We simply learned to see it more clearly. As technology quietly improved, scientists discovered new ways of listening to the stories hidden inside ancient bones. One remarkable method uses advanced scanning machines that can gently look inside fossils without cutting them open. Rather than imagining complicated equipment, picture a bright light shining through the pages of a closed book, allowing you to glimpse the shapes hidden inside without disturbing a single page. These gentle scans reveal delicate passages within bones, tiny air spaces, hidden teeth waiting to emerge, and even the developing skeletons of unborn dinosaurs preserved inside ancient eggs. The fossils remain safe. Their secrets slowly become visible. Researchers also study incredibly small chemical traces preserved within exceptionally rare fossils. Imagine finding the faint scent of a flower lingering inside an old wooden box, long after the flower itself has disappeared. The scent is almost gone, yet it quietly tells you something about what was once there. In a similar way, tiny chemical clues preserved inside fossils sometimes reveal surprising details about ancient life. Some help scientists better understand the colors of feathers. Others provide hints about growth, diet, or the environments where dinosaurs once lived. Each clue is wonderfully small. Together, they gradually transform our understanding. Computers have also become quiet companions in this journey. When a fossil is incomplete, researchers can gently create digital models, carefully testing how bones might have fit together or how an animal may have walked. These models do not replace the fossils. They simply allow scientists to ask thoughtful questions without risking damage to the originals. It is rather like assembling an old family photograph from scattered pieces, always knowing that every missing fragment deserves patience rather than guesswork. Some discoveries remind us how easily first impressions can change. One remarkable dinosaur called Dinosaurs puzzled scientists for decades. At first, only its enormous arms had been discovered. No one knew what the rest of the animal looked like. Its long story became one of paleontology's quiet mysteries. Years later, after additional fossils were uncovered, an entirely different picture emerged. Instead of the fearsome giant many had imagined, Dinosaurs proved to be one of the strangest dinosaurs ever discovered. A tall, feathered animal with a broad duck-like beak, a sail rising along its back, and surprisingly peaceful feeding habits. The Earth had quietly been keeping the rest of the story all along. It simply waited until enough pieces were found. Perhaps that is one of the loveliest lessons science offers. Every discovery is an invitation rather than a conclusion. Even today, new dinosaur species continue to be described from fossils found across the world. Some are enormous, others are no larger than a family dog. Some preserve delicate feathers, others reveal nests, footprints, healed injuries, or tiny traces of ancient colors that no one believed could survive for millions of years. Each discovery adds another gentle sentence to a story that is still being written. No scientist expects the final page to arrive. Instead, they continue listening. One careful brushstroke, one thoughtful question, one quiet fossil at a time. And as the ancient bones slowly emerge once more into the sunlight, they remind us that although the dinosaurs vanished from the living world long ago, their story has never truly stopped growing. It simply found new storytellers. Our journey has carried us across an extraordinary stretch of time. Together, we have wandered through silent forests that no longer exist, watched enormous rivers carve their patient paths across forgotten continents, stood beneath skies filled with ancient wings, and quietly followed creatures whose footsteps echoed across the earth for longer than human minds can easily imagine. Now, as the story gently settles, there is one final idea waiting for us. It is a simple idea, and perhaps the most comforting one of all. Dinosaurs never completely disappeared. For many generations, people believed the age of dinosaurs ended on a single distant day. The great animals vanished, and their world faded into stone. In one sense, that is true. The towering sauropods no longer reach above forests. The great horned herds no longer cross wide floodplains. The mighty Tyrannosaurus rex no longer walks beside ancient rivers. Those remarkable animals belong to a world that has quietly slipped beyond living memory. Yet evolution rarely closes a story all at once. It prefers gentle transitions. Just as the first feathers began as simple coverings before eventually helping animals fly, the ending of one age slowly became the beginning of another. Long before the Great Extinction, small feathered dinosaurs had already learned to move through the forests in new ways. Some glided, some flew short distances, others gradually became better suited to life in the trees than upon the ground. When the world changed, those quiet experiments continued. Generation after generation, the descendants of those ancient survivors slowly became the birds we know today. It is an astonishing thought. The robin searching for worms after the rain, the owl waiting patiently beneath the evening sky, the eagle riding invisible currents of warm air above distant mountains, the tiny hummingbird hovering beside a flower. Each carries a story that began long before the first human ever looked upward in wonder. If you have ever watched a bird gently tilt its head while listening to the world around it, you have already witnessed a small echo of the age of dinosaurs. Its feathers, its hollow bones, its careful nest, its patient care for its young. None of these appeared suddenly. They are quiet gifts, handed down across unimaginably deep time. Sometimes people ask what dinosaurs looked like. Perhaps a gentler question is this: what do dinosaurs look like today? The answer may already be singing outside your window. As human beings slowly began uncovering fossils, another kind of journey quietly unfolded: curiosity. Long before children filled museums with excited whispers, careful researchers spent years kneeling beside cliffs, deserts, and riverbanks, patiently uncovering bones that had rested in darkness for tens of millions of years. Each discovery invited another question. How did this animal live? What color were its feathers? Did it care for its young? How did it move? The remarkable thing about science is that every answer gently opens the door to another question. Knowledge grows much like a forest. One tree appears, then another. Eventually, an entire landscape quietly surrounds you. Museums became places where these ancient stories could be shared. Imagine walking through one of those peaceful halls. Soft lights fall across towering skeletons, carefully assembled bone by bone. Children stand silently beneath necks that seem to disappear into the ceiling. Adults pause beside tiny feathered fossils no larger than a crow. No one has traveled backward through time. Yet for a few quiet moments, everyone is invited to imagine. Stone becomes memory. Memory becomes understanding. Understanding becomes wonder. The path that brought us here was not always smooth. During the 19th century, there was even a period sometimes remembered as the Bone Wars, when rival fossil hunters competed fiercely to discover new dinosaurs. Their enthusiasm helped uncover many remarkable fossils, though their rivalry also led to mistakes and missed opportunities. Science has learned much since then. Today, discoveries are far more often built upon cooperation than competition. Researchers from many countries share ideas, compare evidence, and patiently test one another's conclusions. The story of dinosaurs has become a shared human story, one that belongs to everyone willing to listen. Even now, new discoveries continue every year. A feather, preserved in astonishing detail. A nest hidden beneath ancient rock. Footprints crossing a riverbank that disappeared tens of millions of years ago. A new species resting quietly beneath layers of stone until someone gently brushes away the dust. The Earth has not finished telling its story. It simply speaks very slowly. Perhaps that is why dinosaurs continue to capture our imagination so completely. They remind us that life is far older, far more patient, and far more connected than our everyday experience sometimes allows us to see. The mountains outside your window are still changing. The rivers are still shaping valleys. Birds are still carrying ancient traditions into every new morning. And evolution has never truly stopped. It continues quietly all around us. One generation, then another. One feather, then another. One small change carried gently into the future. As our own quiet journey draws toward its end, perhaps you can imagine standing once more beneath that warm Cretaceous sky. The forests stretch toward the horizon. Flowers sway gently beside a winding river. A distant herd moves peacefully through the afternoon light. Far above, feathered wings drift across the open sky. The scene slowly softens. The colors become gentler. The sounds grow quieter. The ancient world begins to fade, not into darkness, but into memory. Then, almost without noticing, that memory becomes the present. The forest becomes the trees outside your own home. The river becomes one flowing somewhere not far away. The feathered wings remain, only now they belong to birds greeting another ordinary morning. Perhaps tomorrow, when you hear birdsong drifting through an open window, you will listen just a little differently. Not because the sound has changed, but because you now know how astonishingly long its journey has been. Across extinctions, across changing continents, across silent forests turned to stone, across more than 66 million years of patient history. Those quiet wings have carried the story all the way to today, and in their gentle song, the age of dinosaurs still whispers to the world.